time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. On Friday afternoon of the third week of my second school month, something happened that made the pupils take more interest in schoolwork than ever. Since Bert Eastman ran a coal wagon between Upper Lonesome and the Valley, and since he was interested in a curious way in other people's affairs and in school teachers and schools, he had again contacted May Woods and told her that our school was a much better school than hers. He had told her that I was a better teacher than she, and this infuriated her. She challenged me to bring my pupils to her school for an arithmetic match. Challenge was all we wanted. On that Friday, we all left Lonesome Valley at noon on foot for Upper Lonesome. And for the first time, I came face to face with one of the most beautiful teachers I had ever seen. I could understand why Bill Coffey had bought a convertible too big for the turns in the Lonesome Creek Road for this girl. Maybe he could win her with an automobile. She was beautiful, with crow-wing black hair, big soft brown eyes shaded with heavy lashes, pretty white teeth, and lovely lips. Her schoolhouse was immaculately clean. Her pupils were well disciplined. There wasn't anything wrong with her school that I could see. Her pupils were all on one side of the big center aisle, and the other side was reserved for my pupils. The two long recitation seats were moved to the back of the schoolroom for visitors. They were filled and people were standing. There was probably over 100 visitors to watch the match. Among them was Bert Eastman. Before we began, Miss Woods and I agreed on a few simple rules. One was that she, Bert Eastman, and I would be the judges. We agreed that if a pupil could work the problem in his head and call out the correct answer, he didn't have to write the figures on the blackboard. And we agreed that the pupil called from his seat to the board to work against the one still standing had his choice in addition, multiplication, subtraction, common or decimal fractions, long or short division. We started with the beginners. She called one and I called one. We matched them at the blackboard in front so all could see. They were about evenly matched for speed and accuracy, but when my beginners were gone, she had half of hers left, for she had twice as many in the beginning. Each of my pupils had to turn down two of hers before we even had a break. Then I called Denver Likens to the blackboard, my big first grader. He stood there calling out the answers until he had eliminated all her beginners. Someone shouted, "Eighth grader!" But I showed Miss Woods my record book. Denver Likens stood there until one of Miss Woods' pupils asked for a problem in addition. She asked for 4 columns of figures to add. Denver couldn't add 4 columns in his head, though he could add 3. This girl lived near Denver, and she knew his strength and his weakness. She turned down this boy that couldn't make figures on the blackboard, but this match left him with a determination to learn how. Denver Likens had turned down 7 pupils, then Guy Hawkins turned down 5, Ova Sailors turned down 3. We turned down and they turned down until we got to the 4th grade. Then I called Big Don Conway and showed in my record book that he was a 4th grade pupil. He turned down 10, all of Miss Wood's 4th grade pupils, and 6 of her 5th grade. Don was pleased with himself too, and we were pleased, for many of them were as large as Don. In the upper grades, Miss Woods had 3 pupils to my 1, but I had one girl, Margaret Prater, who was excellent in decimal and common fractions. She was the best pupil in my school. I held her for the last pupil. The match went on, with shouts from our side if we turned down one of theirs. Shouts came from the other side when they turned down one of ours. Also, the visitors in the back of the room applauded for Upper Lonesome, for they were from this school vicinity. I had only Margaret Prater left when Miss Woods had 7 8th graders. Could Margaret do it, I wondered? Would she get excited and make a mistake? Miss Woods used one of her best pupils to eliminate Margaret immediately and end the match, which had taken nearly 2 hours. But Margaret asked for common fractions when she went to the front to work against this star pupil who had eliminated 4 of our pupils. Margaret turned her down. Miss Wood's pupil's decimal point was in the wrong place. Then Miss Wood sent another star pupil to work against Margaret. He chose addition. Margaret was right and he was wrong, though he finished first. The third person she sent chose subtraction, and Margaret beat her by a second. Both were right. The fourth pupil chose short division. Margaret worked the problem and checked it while her contestant stood beside her shaking and couldn't do a thing. The fifth pupil walked up with determination. She chose long division. They were trying to find one part of arithmetic that was Margaret's weakness. She turned this pupil down by a split second. Both problems were right. Their sixth pupil said, "Let Margaret choose the problem," for she felt she would turn her down. Margaret chose multiplication of common fractions. She won easily, almost before her contestant got started. Only one was left now. This time a tall girl, older looking than Miss Woods and much larger. She chose decimal fractions. Margaret looked at her, then waited for the problem. Miss Wood's pupil put the problem down so fast that she mistook a 7 for a 3. She worked what she had on the board correctly, but Margaret had beaten her by a split second. Margaret was right again. We had won the match against odds. Then we had to hurry home. Everybody had his evening chores at home to do. We were late, too. I had to ride to the valley, fetch my cows from the pasture, and milk them. This arithmetic match with Upper Lonesome made news the entire length of Lonesome Valley and beyond. Bert Eastman was our publicity man. He reported the match to anyone willing to listen. He knew the pupils on both sides, and he remembered how many were turned down and who turned them down. This match created a school spirit at Lonesome Valley. Though it was late, we organized a baseball team. Good, clean play, good, clean fun in the form of competition was the thing. The last week in August, my pupils met pupils of the Chicken Creek School and defeated them. The first week in September, we met the Unknown School and defeated them. We had only the Valley, largest of all the rural schools, left. When this match came off, we had visitors that had to stand in the yard and look through the windows. People could hardly believe that we defeated the Valley and that we never used Margaret Prater, our best pupil. Guy Hawkins turned down 15. This was a new kind of fighting for Guy, and the people around the valley got the surprise of their lives when this happened. Guy had found out about a new kind of fighting that he liked much better. We had spelling matches against these same schools, and we lost 2 and won 2. They organized ball teams, too, and we played them. We lost 2 and won 7 games. Denver Likens, Don Conway, Guy Hawkins, and Ova Sailors were good baseball players. Play for my pupils, play for myself. I was the needle's eye. Play was the thread that ran so true. Teaching was not work as it had been. Teaching was play. Teaching was play work. It was the spirit of something. It was great. It was fun. I had never in my life, much as I loved to go to school, enjoyed myself more. My teaching school was a great game of play. Perhaps someone else thought we were doing too much play. I will never know who reported my school to County School Superintendent Harley Staggers. I was afraid to accuse anyone. But John Conway made a trip to Lansboro to pay his taxes and get winter supplies. And it was shortly after his trip to Lansboro that the county superintendent slipped into my schoolhouse and was sitting there before I knew it. It was the first time he had ever been to Lonesome Valley in the 5 years he had been superintendent, but his presence didn't bother me. I went ahead teaching. I let Margaret Prater teach my numbers game to the beginners outside the schoolhouse. Superintendent Staggers followed her outside and listened. My school was not too noisy, but it did have a working noise, as I explained to Superintendent Staggers later. Bees made noise in the hive when they made honey. It was a working noise. If bees were extremely quiet, they wouldn't make any honey. "You're doing a wonderful job here," Superintendent Staggers admitted. "One of the most wide-awake schools I have seen in the county." Then I talked to Superintendent Staggers and told him about the substitute of play for work in my school. I told him about the spirit of competitive play in our arithmetic matches, spelling bees, ball games, and how my pupils were interested, how patrons were interested enough to come and watch these matches, and how the school spirit had stimulated the pupils and their parents alike. I told him how we had applied arithmetic in the community. I told him everything, and then I answered every question he asked me. He didn't ask me why I had moved from the community. I would have told him if he had asked, but he knew after I had talked to him and he had questioned me that my school and its community was as alive as a beehive when the bees are gathering their summer sweets from the blossoms. When I drew my second check and started to pay Uncle Amos and Aunt Effie, they would take only $12 because I had milked their cows. By a little work, I had cut my living expenses to less than half. This left me $56 clear money from teaching. In addition to getting my expenses cut to less than half for this excellent place to live, I got the use of the most intelligent and one of the prettiest ponies that ever carried a saddle. I rode Sundance when and where I wanted to. One weekend, I rode him 30 miles home on Friday evening, and on Sunday, rode him back. Seldom, if ever, did one of my Lonesome Valley pupils stay out of school because he wanted to. He stayed out of school usually for one of three reasons. He was sick, he had to help harvest the crops, he didn't have sufficient clothes, shoes, or books. In September, the tobacco ripened, and many of my pupils had to stay home and help with tobacco cutting and hauling to the barn. The cane ripened, too, in September, and it had to be stripped, topped, cut, hauled to the mill, and the juice pressed from it and boiled into sorghum molasses. It was better to do this before frost so the sorghum would keep its delicious flavor and its golden color. Potatoes had to be dug. Corn had to be cut. September was a busy time in Lonesome Valley, where the men of this rugged American earth eked a bare subsistence for themselves and their families. My attendance was down considerably in September. There wasn't an attendance officer to see why they didn't come to school. If the pupil went, it was all right. If he didn't, it was all right too. It was a land of freedom and work, but we had made our school so attractive in appearance that the pupils loved the place. They had had a hand in helping to make it beautiful, to make their school their home during school days, their workshop, their beehive. This was their place and my place. It was the liveliest spot in our community. It was the only place they could go, and many would never go beyond this school. Their education ended when they finished at Lonesome Valley. These were their happy days. Beyond these days, for those that remained in Lonesome Valley, it was eternal work, 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 and the sameness of life. It was marriage, children, death, and burial in Lonesome Valley. I thought of these things when I taught my pupils all the practical things I could teach them: how to write letters, measure land, be clean with drinking water, about personal sanitation, screens for their windows, and so many things aside from the dry as powder, uninteresting textbooks I was forced to teach because they were standard, selected by someone in the State Department who didn't teach, perhaps never had, and if he had taught once upon a time, was far removed from it now. When I gave them assignments to write themes, I never gave them the topics listed in their books. I told them to write about the things they knew, about people, places, things, and adventures in Lonesome Valley. In October, my attendance grew, and to show you that my pupils loved to come to school, many came thinly clad and barefooted after the white frost had fallen and had blanketed the frozen land, for the farmers hadn't sold their tobacco crops yet. They usually sold them about Christmas time, and this was their money crop. Many times I saw the red spots on the white frost from the bleeding little bare feet of those who came to school regardless of shoes. I couldn't buy shoes for them, not on my salary and in my circumstances. But for one little boy and girl whose father was serving a sentence in the federal penitentiary for converting his corn into moonshine whiskey, I did buy shoes. No one knew I bought them. Their mother, with another child on the way, was fighting a brave battle to keep her children and home together. I had lived all my life in a community where these things happened. When I saw blood on the snow from the moonshiners' children coming to my school, it did something to me. I wanted to fight for them harder than I had ever fought Guy Hawkins. The sea of multicolored leaves were whipped from the Lonesome Valley trees by the raw and biting November winds. The two great furrows, turned in opposite directions by some great mythical plow in the beginning of time to make narrow-gauged Lonesome Valley, were naked, grotesque, and ugly now. Great, gray, scaly rocks slept like monsters high on the rugged slopes, undisturbed by winter's icy blast. Lonesome Valley had lost the beauty of summer bloom, bud, and leaf that had clothed its scars with many shades of green. Autumn had passed. Winter was on us. And if there was ever a cold, icy funnel anywhere on the earth's surface, it was Lonesome Valley. We crowded close to the pot-bellied stove. We fired it until it was red hot. The heat from it hurt our eyes, and now we wished for the evenness of the July heat. We knew we could bear the July heat more easily than we could the screaming fury of icy wind that continued to smite Lonesome Valley. The corners of our schoolroom were cold even when our stove was dangerously overheated. But my thinly clad pupils braved the smiting winter wind. My attendance grew in this weather because the farm work was done and the pupils were free of home labors for the first time. This was the time to get learning. This was the time for everybody in the school census to attend Lonesome Valley, attend school in the dead of winter, and sit by the pot-bellied stove. Seats had to be pulled up and placed in circles around the stove like an amphitheater. The teacher couldn't stand in the middle either. Weather had drawn the seats circles around the pot-bellied stove, but had left the teacher outside the circle. Suddenly we would have sunshine that would thaw the frozen earth, and Lonesome Valley would be a sea of mud. Sundance would sink to his knees as he carried me 5 miles through the mud on these short winter days. The whole valley would be dark and hauntingly ugly. Hungry birds would fly hither and thither looking for weed seeds, chirping their mournful winter notes. The narrow-gauged valley looked hungry and barren as the wind lifted the carcasses of old leaves from the bottom of the funnel and swept them away to unknown places. And when I saw this barren, hungry, desolate land where there was not food for crow, beast, or fowl in winter, I knew why everybody worked in the fields while the season was here and it was time for work. It was the fable of the ant and the grasshopper, and the Lonesome Valley people were ants. They were not the idle dancing grasshoppers. They worked while the season for growth was with them, and they laid away, but not too much, for the horrible, monstrous winter weather we now knew. December came. We had a Christmas tree, and my pupils drew numbers from a hat and exchanged gifts. We had a Christmas program, and I bought candy, apples, oranges, and bananas. We lost only 1 day for Christmas holiday. My pupils hardly knew the meaning of letting out school a week for Christmas, for these were the days when they could go to school. These were the days when they couldn't plow and till the earth and harvest the crops. These were the days to get an education. Our 6-month school couldn't go too far into the winter, for they had to start burning tobacco beds and getting ready for another crop year. January came. My attendance leaped to 60, though I had never seen more snow, more icy winds, more unbearable weather. But this was our last month of school. Time was running out for them. Time to get their education, time for their play, relaxation. The fun of association was coming to a close. Our good school year, our good time together, ended on February 4th, and now was the time for pupils to get their promotions. Guy Hawkins had received the highest number. He had gone from the 1st to the 5th grade. Ova Sailors was promoted to the 4th. Don Conway leaped to the 7th. No one had failed. 6 8th graders had finished school. They would not go anymore. Their good years had ended. Last day of school we had a program. Members of the community were invited. They came until the house was packed. We had readings, and then Guy Hawkins and Don Conway chose up, and we had an arithmetic match. Finally, I shook hands with my pupils, their mothers and fathers, and thanked them for their cooperation, for their sending me such rugged, fine young Americans. I told them that I would soon be a pupil again, and expressed my heartfelt joy for this chance to teach their children. I made them laugh when I told them I had learned more in 6 months of teaching than I had learned in my 3 years of high school, and that I would return to school a much smarter pupil. And I would. At 1 p.m., I was in the saddle for the last time. My pupils watched me ride away around the bend and out of sight. They waved to me and shouted their goodbyes, and I waved to them and shouted my goodbyes. The ground was frozen, and I made good time, giving Sundance the rein. I looked to my right and to my left for the last time at Lonesome Valley. I was leaving a familiar land where I had lived 6 of the most exciting months of my life. At 1:45, I was home. I put Sundance in the barn and patted his nose. My clothes were packed, and I said goodbye to Aunt Effie and Uncle Amos. "I won't say goodbye to you," Uncle Amos said. "I aim to play you a little fiddle piece so you'll remember us." He played Chicken Reel, and Aunt Effie danced. "You know, Stuart," Uncle Amos laughed, "Effie and I have thought of taking out adoption papers for you. We always wanted a dozen, and we just got 11. You'd make the dozen." We'll stop right there since we're at the end of Jesse's time there in Lonesome Valley. We'll have to see what happens to him next week, see where he goes from there. What a really kind of bittersweet, though, to leave those kids. Exciting part of the book, but bittersweet. Really exciting, though, that they got to have those contests. Now, Bert Eastman, he was a real character, wasn't he? Can you just see him going up to the other school and saying, "This school down here is a whole lot better than you"? He was really stirring the pot and instigating, but he wanted to see them compete with each other. So he got to see that, and then it turned out that that was really great. And then Jesse got to take his school to against all the other schools, the unknown school and the chicken run or chicken something it was, and then even got to go to the valley and compete there. And that was supposed to be the best school, and his little school did good there too. So that was really, really exciting. Interesting too, I thought, that at the first school at Miss Woods, the teacher there, when they went to her school, that like when Don Conway went up to the board to work the problems, some of the people he competed with were his size and his age, even though they were like in those really low grades. You know, it's interesting that was common, at least with those 2 schools, but I bet it was common maybe with all the schools except maybe the one in the valley. I don't know about that, but common that you had like, you know, teenagers that were still in the 1st grade or the 2nd grade or whatever it was. So I thought that was interesting. And then because of this happening, that really did give the school a sense of school spirit and caused the community to really rally around them. So really interesting that Bert Eastman, you got to wonder if he was just, like Jesse says, he was somebody that wanted to be in other people's affairs. So he just wanted to know if, I guess, a friendly little competition and see who was actually doing the best teaching or something like that. But nice that it made this real camaraderie. And you know, it made the kids there at school really close to each other too, to get to go to those different places and compete, and they all depended on each other and all that. I really, really liked that. Now, I never was anything like that. I was too shy. I was too backward, as we would say in school, to volunteer to be in contest or anything like that. I remember when I think it was in Mr. Smart's class in about 5th grade, he would do spelling bees, which is different than the math things they were doing. I never did very good in them. I'm not good at spelling, and then I would be so backward. I'd just be relieved when I got out, you know, when I got to go sit down. I was never good at any of that, but spelling bees really the only kind of competition I can think of. Although this was not really a competition, but in 8th grade, there was Modern Woodman. If you're familiar with the Modern Woodman Insurance Company, they would each year in those days give a history award to the 8th grade, to one person in the 8th grade. But it wasn't, you didn't have to compete and answer questions or anything like that. It was just whoever had the top the top grade, and I really wanted that. I loved history, and I wanted that, and I competed against, it was me and one boy all year long. But in the very end, I beat him. I got the award. I still have it somewhere. It's just a plastic plaque is all it is. It says Modern Woodman awards you this in history for your, study of history or something like that. But I really wanted that, and I won it. So that was, I hadn't even thought about that in years. I just now thought of it. Probably the biggest, all that descriptive stuff there was talking about what was the biggest change was Guy Hawkins, because then when they went to the Valley and those other schools, I loved how they said that, turning down. So he was turning down people, like he turned down 15 people. So he come a long way then to be able to do that. And then because the contest was all about the math, you got to know Jesse taking them out into the, neighbors, people, farms and houses and stuff, and doing all that extra arithmetic really helped. And then also the people that come there, like Miss Bert Eastman with this wagon, that all had to help them with their arithmetic. And then there was Margaret. I guess she was probably just a gifted student, since he said she was his best pupil, so probably not just in math, probably in everything she was the best pupil, so she was gifted for sure. And then the superintendent coming and slipping in. That's a real Appalachian thing. If you slip in, or you might slip off and not tell nobody. Granny used to always accuse Pap of slipping off, not telling her where he was going. He'd slip off, and then she'd be hunting for him. This is after he retired. Anyway, but the superintendent slipped into the back of Jesse's school. He seen him come in the door and just sat down. Well, Jesse immediately knew, you've not been here in 5 years since you've been superintendent, and that's hard to believe, ain't it, that a superintendent wouldn't visit the school in 5 years. Anyway, but he said, it's kind of obvious that somebody had told on him and said, you better go up there and see what this Jesse's doing. But turned out the superintendent was really pleased with what he was doing when he listened to how he was teaching, and he seen how the students were learning, and was impressed, I guess, that Margaret took the younger ones outside and was teaching them, and so that turned out, whoever told on him, that backfired on him. I really liked the part where he talked about, he explained to the superintendent about how he had been doing, how he'd been teaching about play. He'd been putting play, and they were actually playing to learn. I liked that part. But especially when he said, he had tried to, thinking about the ones that they would never go past Lonesome Valley. That was just going to be it, their education. But thinking about that, Jesse tried to teach them about everyday things like the sanitation of the water, or their personal hygiene, or, different little things like that. Now, when I was in high school, we had a class, and I can't remember the name of it. It was like EC, I don't remember, EC or whatever it was, something like that. But it was stuff like that. It was practical things. It was, they taught us how to balance a checkbook. It was like things that you needed. No matter what career path you were going to go on, it was everyday stuff that you needed to know. I remember, Miss Dickey was the teacher, talked about even like how you should do, interviews, like thinking about trying to get your first job, and how you should try to dress, and, all those kind of things. So I don't know if they teach classes like that today or not, but that's sort of what he was doing. There is one thing that I disagree with Jesse. He was kind of saying that for those that he knew, like those 8th graders that graduated there at the end, that was it. They wasn't going to go to any other school. And he was making it sound really drear, like their good years was over. I don't think that. I think there's such value in raising a family and getting married and having kids and growing your own food and making a home and filling it with love and passing on your values to your kids, that I certainly don't think their life was over. So he was really down on the, those were their good years, getting to go to school. That was something they'd always look back on, I'm sure, and I'm sure they did enjoy it, because people worked so hard in those days. But I don't think their life was suddenly just drear and, work. Yeah, but people that go to school work too. You end up, humans are made to work, I feel like. Anyway, that's that part I kind of disagree with him about. I think there is a whole world besides the education, and lucky for those people, they did. If they graduated 8th grade, then they knew how to read, and they knew how to do the arithmetic and all that, so they could continue to read, to get books and learn as they raised their families. Anyway, I didn't mean to say all that. What I meant to say was I liked when he was giving them their writing assignments and things, he would say, he tried to make it, about their life, teaching them those things like the sanitation and stuff, but also even their writing themes. He said he didn't give the topics out of the book. He just told them to write about Lonesome Valley, about what they knew in Lonesome Valley, whether it was the landscape or the people or whatever it was, just to write about that. So I really loved that. When Corey and Katie were in school, in our area, and I'm not even sure they still do this today because it's been so long, but there was a really big emphasis on reading, but it was all surrounding this, I think AR was the name of it, accelerated reading, I guess. It was all, you had to read the books, and then you had to go to the library and you had to take a test and on the book that you read, and then you had to have so many points, and that was part of your grade, And it just, for a lot of kids, including Corey and Katie, it just made them hate reading because they were forced to do that, Well, then Corey and Katie had to go to another school for a year. They went to a charter school, the Learn Center. It's no longer there now. But at that school, the teacher had, it was a reading teacher, Miss Carol Jean. She had a different way of looking at it. And she, well, there was no AR, there was no test about that. But she said, we want you to read, but what are you interested in? Let me find out what you're interested in. And we can find a book about that, and that's what you can read. Well, my little Corey at that time, what she was interested in, this may come as a shock to you, it's crazy, but was dirt track racing. She was interested in dirt track racing. There's a dirt track race here in Brasstown's been here forever. Actually, it's not opening this year, which is kind of sad. But anyway, at that time, Corey and Katie and Matt, that was one of their favorite things to do. They'd go to the races. I never cared much for it. I would go sometimes, especially when me and Matt were dating back then, but I don't care. Or when we were first married before we had kids. Anyway, but Corey and Katie eat it up just like Matt. They loved it. So that's what Corey was interested in. And Miss Carol Jean said, okay, I'll see what I can do. Well, she found like a dirt track and race, like a magazine about it, and she wrote to them and told them about Corey, and they sent the school like a whole box of old editions of that magazine, and that's what Corey read. And she loved it, and that's what she read, because that's what she was interested in. And today, and even after that, for years, Corey and Katie love to read, especially Corey. Katie likes it, but she don't like it as much as me and Corey. Me and Corey are constantly like sharing books back and forth, mostly fiction books. But anyway, so Corey definitely had the love of reading. It had been just tamped down by those AR points. So I really loved that, and that's kind of what Jesse was doing, write about what you know. It also reminded me of another example of that is the John C. Campbell Folk School, famed for lots of things, but especially for the Brasstown carvers. And the people, when they first started carving way back then, back in the 30s, Miss Campbell got Murray Martin to come and to teach that, to oversee that program. And that's what she told them, that's what she said, is that you need to carve what you know. So it was people in those days that had farms, so she wanted them to carve what they knew. So they ended up carving the pigs and the donkeys and the kittens, around their farm, and the cows and all those the lambs and the sheep. They carved what they knew. The chickens and the roosters, so they would carve what they knew. She didn't want them to carve, be carving a tiger or something like that, although I'm sure they were definitely capable of that. She thought it was really important for them to be able to see, to look at what they were carving. And so that is another example of, learning where you're at. So I really love that part of Jesse telling them to write about Lonesome Valley, what they knew. The part about the kids not having shoes was really sad. I can't imagine their little, because two things. I can't just imagine not having shoes. Earlier today I was talking with someone, and they were talking about, it's a project where they were going to help someone, and they were looking ahead into the future of when school will start back. School's just now getting out in our area. But they were talking about how that, their kids, the little kids they were talking about, was maybe getting them some shoes. And then they said, well, they'll need 2 pair because they need one for gym and one to wear. So that's how drastically things are different today. In those days, the little kids there didn't even have the 1 pair of shoes to wear. And then today we're asking kids to bring 2 pairs. They need 2 pairs of shoes to school. One to wear on their feet and one to put in the gym, so that it's, I know that's to protect the gym floor and all that kind of stuff, but And if your closet's like mine, you've got too many shoes. I've got too many shoes. So such a different time. But the other thing that made me think of is that their feet, they were used to going barefooted. So their little feet was tough on the bottom. Wasn't like my tender ones. If I have to walk out in the gravel, I'm like, can't. Well, when I was a kid, I could run across it. But now today it hurts because I'm used to wearing shoes. But their little feet was hard, and then they still got broke open and were leaving little bloody spots on the snow. So that really is heartbreaking, and really shows you how far we've come, but also shows how the kids really wanted to learn. Like he was saying, they come through the snow, and then they didn't have good coats and good, I'm sure none of them had like you think about everything we put on today if we send our kids out to play in the snow with the big heavy clothes and the wool socks and the big gloves and a toboggan and all those things. So they didn't have those kind of things, and they come anyway, and that really impressed Jesse, you could tell. I guess there's one other thing. I said I disagreed with him about that, but one other thing that I disagreed with him when he was talking about he called it grotesque. Now that was some of that beautiful descriptive writing that he has. You could just see the big rocks. He said they were like monsters sitting up on the mountains, because once the leaves and stuff was gone, you could see everything in winter. But he said it was grotesque and ugly. I think the winter is just as pretty as the summer, just in a different way. It is so stark and bare, but there's such a beauty in it, such a beautifulness in it. I really love that too, but that was some of his beautiful, beautiful descriptive writing. I could just like see myself looking up at that narrow gauged valley, like he said, looking at both sides and seeing the big rocks and seeing the trees empty of their leaves. And then a really sweet ending there for him to, end of school and promoted everybody, graduated some people. They all waved by at him as he went out of sight, and he went and put the horse up or the pony up, and then Uncle Amos played him a tune, and Aunt Effie danced, and then they said goodbye. Even said they, thought about adopting him. So such a sweet ending to that part. So you'll have to come back next week to see what happens next. It'll be a whole new adventure for Jesse. I hope you'll leave a comment though and tell me what you thought about this part, and if you enjoyed it as much as I did.